Hello, everyone. The 16th century saw the rise of theater as a popular form of entertainment. Before this, theatrical productions were relegated to holidays, religious festivals, or private performances for the king and those who could afford to host acting companies. As acting companies became more popular, they had the capital to build permanent theaters where they could charge anyone to watch their performances. Anyone who could afford the cheapest price could see the same plays that were performed in front of royalty. And so, the theater is a unique form of entertainment for the early modern period. In this presentation, I will introduce the elements of tragedy, the early modern theater, and Shakespeare's first tragedy, Titus Andronicus. Let's get started. First, we'll start with defining tragedy. For Shakespeare and his contemporaries, Aristotle is the person who provided the working definition of tragedy. The following definition comes from Aristotle's classic work, Poetry, which Shakespeare would have read while in school. A tragedy is the imitation of an action that is serious and also as having magnitude, complete in itself, in language with pleasurable accessories, which arouses pity and fear wherewith to accomplish its catharsis of such emotions. For Aristotle, action is the key. Tragedy is essentially an imitation not of persons, but of action and life, of happiness and misery. The action involves agents who must necessarily have their distinctive qualities both of character and thought, since it is from these that we ascribe certain qualities to their actions. In other words, tragedy's goal is to make people better than the characters on stage. In short, the key terms for tragedy include magnitude, fear and pity, and catharsis. When using the term magnitude, Aristotle is referring to great people performing great actions. This in turn results in great consequences, hence most tragedies involve people in positions of great power. But more than that, the tragic characters are also supposed to be great people. They're supposed to be exemplars of whichever place in society they hold. The tragedy is in watching a great person fall. A tragic character is supposed to arouse both fear and pity. That is, we are meant to be afraid and to feel sympathy for the character throughout the play. Typically this comes from the character's hamartia. That is, their error in judgment. Hamartia is sometimes referred to as a character's fatal flaw. Translators have discovered that this is an imprecise understanding of the word. It's closer to a mistake in judgment more than a character's flaw. Although most students tend to be familiar with the last term here, catharsis, it is still a good idea to review it. Catharsis is a purging of emotions, specifically the emotions elicited from the play's actions. For instance, if the play has elicited anger and revenge within the audience, then the play is supposed to release those emotions so that the audience members no longer feel them. Theatrical performances were not limited to just public theaters. There were at least 3 different types of theatrical spaces, including court theaters, where companies performed for the king or queen, private theaters, where traveling companies performed at private residences, and the public theaters, where anyone who could afford it could watch the performance. The first public theater was built in London around 1576 and signaled a shift in theater as a profitable enterprise. Performance was no longer bound to a religious and official calendar. It was permitted on work days as well as calendar holidays. Despite these changes, theaters and the players who performed there were not viewed as reputable. The theaters were only allowed outside the London city limits, near brothels, bear-baiting houses, and other disreputable institutions. It wasn't unusual for prostitutes and pickpockets to frequent theaters to practice their trades. The first theaters to be built were the Theater, the Curtain, and the Rose. The Globe was built around 1598. Unfortunately, the original Globe burned to the ground due to a cannon misfire in 1613. The current Globe has been built to resemble as closely as possible the original. In the pictures on this slide, notice how the people closest to the stage were standing. In Shakespeare's time, these were the cheap seats, and the people who stood to watch plays were called groundlings. Funnily enough, today, these are the most sought-after seats at the Globe. Theaters at the time did not use electricity, and candles were both expensive and dangerous, so they were constructed to take advantage of the afternoon sun when most performances took place. The stages were mostly bare, using only a minimal number of set pieces. The scene was set by the writers, which explains why characters in Shakespeare's plays spend so much time describing the world around them. They are setting the scene for the audience's imagination. The stage itself is split into three distinct sections: Hell, the trapdoor beneath the stage; Earth, the stage and the upper balcony; and the heavens, the roof that covers the stage. Each of these sections has significant meaning in terms of staging. For instance, in Titus Andronicus, many characters in dead bodies find themselves descending into the underworld through the trapdoor. Meanwhile, royal figures will enter the stage space via the balcony. Their height above everyone else signifies their powerful, authoritative social status. Other characters, like Juliet and Romeo and Juliet, appear in the balcony because they are more heavenly than the other characters who are closer to the earth. Written in 1592, Titus Andronicus is considered Shakespeare's first tragedy. Before that, he made a name for himself writing history plays. George Peele is believed to have contributed some to Titus, but this was typical of the time period. Shakespeare also contributed some scenes and/or speeches in other plays. Writers frequently collaborated with each other. For his first tragedy, Shakespeare adopted the genre of revenge tragedy, which had been popularized in 1580 with Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy. And it seems that Shakespeare was attempting to outdo all other revenge tragedies. Everything is doubled or tripled in the play. For instance, there is not just one revenge plot in Titus, there are two. By all accounts, Titus was a huge success and set the stage for Shakespeare to write more tragedies. I personally love Titus because it contains all the nascent ideas Shakespeare explores in his other tragedies. For instance, we can see early drafts of Lady Macbeth and Cleopatra in Tamora. We can also see the old man preferring a leisurely life instead of accepting his responsibilities as a ruler, just as we see in King Lear. Most of Shakespeare's tragedies have their beginnings in Titus Andronicus, and that makes it all the more fascinating. Another reason I love Titus is its originality. The story appears to be Shakespeare's invention, though he is inspired by a variety of sources. Titus is set in a fictional version of Rome. Unfettered by fact, Shakespeare is free to fabricate an extravagant nightmare universe that presses against the frontiers of plausibility. Indeed, Titus seems to test the limits of what audiences are willing to accept. It's an exceptionally violent play. Greco-Roman myth serves as one source of inspiration for the play, specifically Ovid's version of Procne and Philomel's story in Metamorphoses. Ovid's version of the Procne and Philomel myth starts with King Tereus, Procne's husband, visiting Philomel and experiencing lust for his wife's sister. He kidnaps Philomel and secrets her away to a cabin in the woods. There, he proceeds to rape Philomel. There, waxing pale and trembling sore for fear, and dreading all things, and with tears demanding sadly where her sister was, he shut her up, and therewithal bewrayed his wicked lust. And so, by force, because she was a maid, and all alone, he vanquished her. It booted not at all, that she on sister, or on sire, or on the gods, did call. But Tereus didn't stop with rape. To make sure that she could not name her attacker, King Tereus decided to cut out her tongue. He, drawing out his naked sword, that at his girdle did hung, he took her rudely by the hair, and wrung her hands behind her, compelling her to hold them there, while he himself did bind her. When Philomel saw the sword, she hoped she would have died. But as she yearned and called eye upon her father's name, and strived to have spoken still, the cruel tyrant came, and with a pair of pincers fast, did catch her by the tongue, and with his sword did cut it off. Eventually, Procne finds her sister while wandering through the woods. Since Philomel could not speak, she decides to use her skill at weaving to tell her story through a tapestry. And this is how Procne learns of her sister's fate at the hands of King Tereus, Procne's husband. Keep in mind that at the time, women had very few recourses for revenge against their husbands. One method of revenge was removing their husband's future, in other words, their children. According to the medical understandings of the time, children were exact copies of the father. Mothers were only considered incubators for the man's seed, contributing the necessary heat for a child's growth in the womb, but contributing nothing else. Therefore, both biologically and legally speaking, children were the property of the father. And so, Procne murders her son, Idas, and cooks him in a meat pie that is then served to King Tereus. King Tereus, sitting in the throne of his forefathers, fed and swallowed down the selfsame flesh that of his bowels bred. Fetch Idas hither, he said. No longer her most cruel joy dissemble could the queen, but ever murder, coveting the messenger to bean. She said, the thing thou ask for, thou hast within. In Titus, Shakespeare doubles this revenge by having not one son, but two, served up in a meat pie. Another of Shakespeare's inspirations is the stock character, the Machiavellian villain. The English were not very fond of Niccolò Machiavelli, writer of The Prince. According to Machiavelli, a man who strives to make a show of correct comportment in every circumstance can only come to ruin among so many who have other designs. Hence, it is necessary for a prince who wishes to maintain his position to learn how to be able not to be good, and to use this ability according to circumstances. In other words, the Machiavellian villain uses whatever means necessary, both moral and immoral, to achieve their goals. Aaron, the Moor, fills this role in Titus. Please note that Aaron is one of Shakespeare's few black characters. During his time, blacks and women were not allowed to act on stage, and so Aaron was most likely played by a white actor in blackface makeup. And while Moor referred to anyone who was both foreign and non-Christian, Aaron makes repeated references to his skin color. And so it's interesting to watch the development of his character. Another interesting note about Aaron is that he has the second most lines in the entire play, second only to Titus himself. He also has a number of soliloquies, which were usually reserved for the most important characters in the play. Aaron's complexity and uniqueness is worth studying. Thank you for watching, and please let me know if you have any questions.